Let's take a few minutes in church history, shall we? I want to introduce you to the Cappadocian Fathers. You can call them Cappadocian Fathers if you're cooler than me. That's perfectly fine. The Cappadocian Fathers were church fathers in the 4th century, so the 300s, and they lived in what is now modern-day Turkey, in a province called Cappadocia. It was a very influential area of the world in terms of heavy-hitting theologians, a lot of councils and conversations and books being produced and carrying on there. And the Cappadocian Fathers were those who were around after the Nicene Creed was written, but it was not yet in its final form. It still had some confusions about its language, not so much its meaning, but its language, that the Cappadocian Fathers put forward edits and suggestions to, which ended up being adopted later, and it's really their edits which we read in our modern versions of the Nicene Creed. So we thank them for that. Their names were Basil of Caesarea, which was a city in Cappadocia. Basil was otherwise called Basil the Great. He had a brother whose name was Gregory of Nyssa. He was also one of the Cappadocian Fathers. And the other one was Gregory of Nazianzus, another city in Cappadocia. These gentlemen worked together. They were bishops, they were elders, they were preachers, and they were theologians. And they worked together to, as we said, update the language of the Nicene Creed. For those who aren't particularly aware, this should be a date that you've got concreted in your mind, is 325 AD. That's the year 325 AD. That was the year of the Council of Nicaea. Nicaea is a city up in Turkey, just near Constantinople. And there they came together to fight the heresy and the teaching that was gaining popularity called Arianism. Now there was a few solid Arians, there were some semi-Arians, and then there were really the Athanasians, or there were the anti-Arians, and they were those who were correct. Although there was a lot of clarity that needed to be arrived at, and so they came together, instead of just writing letters at each other across the empire, they came together in Nicaea, they had their debates, they put forward a creed that needed to be agreed to for you to keep your job as a preacher in the church. And after that, there was great backlash as the Arians came forward and tried to re-establish their position. They gained political power and actually exiled a lot of the anti-Arians. So it was a very complex and busy time. We're not going to go into all the details, but we can suffice to say this. At the Council of Nicaea, the Arians were, at least there for a time, defeated. The Arians taught that God the Son was the first created being. It is good that he's called God because he's so much greater than every other creature, and it is through him that God created the rest of the world, but he is created. He is not of the same essence as the Father. He is not even of an identical essence of the Father. He doesn't share an essence, and he doesn't have the same essence. He's a different being. He's a created being. And it was against that the biblical theologians defended. They attacked that. They said God the Son is just that. God the Son. They were able to smoke out the heretics with this phrase that they used in their affirmations and denials. They had this phrase that they used in the debate saying, there is not a time when the Son was not. As long as the Father has been, he has had a Son. It has been God the Son. And the Arians couldn't say that. They wanted to say that the Son was created before everything else, but there was a time when he didn't exist. It was only the Father. And so that was one way that they highlighted, identified the heretics, pushed them out, and identified biblical theology. This is where the Cappadocian Fathers come in. After the Nicene Creed, there was still a lot of debate about interpretation. There was still a lot of debate even about the meaning of the creed, and here's why. Half the empire spoke Latin, the western half. Half the empire spoke Greek, the eastern half. And in Greek and Latin, there are conflicting terms that when translated mean different things, but which theologians on both sides of the language divide were trying to use to mean the same thing. So for example, the Nicene Creed said that in God, the original version of it in 325, said that in God there is only one hypostasis, but there is three ousias, or substances. Now they meant what we meant in the Trinity, that there's one essence of God and three persons, but as that language was translated over to Latin for the Western half of the church, it sounded like they had established that there's one being with three substances. Now, if you're familiar with our modern language of the Trinity, you would be backpedaling, you'd be reeling, you'd be going, that's not the Trinity, that's tritheism. That's not how the Greek words were translated. So what the Cappadocian Fathers are largely responsible for doing is taking the Latin and taking the Greek and taking the parties of the biblical theology and bringing them to a synthesis, to an answer, to a cohesive language and terminology of the Trinity. And it's to them that we owe, by God's grace, it's to them that we owe the thanks for the language that was handed down to later generations of the church, that we've inherited, and which was then edited into the Nicene Creed as we now have it today. And that is that they established that God is one ousia. In the Latin, that meant one substance. In the English, or substantia. In the English, we use the language of substance or essence. One being of essence and substance. The Cappadocian Fathers also worked out to say that there is three hypostases in God, which in the Latin was persona, which in the English we use the language of person. One being, three persons. One ousia, essence, three hypostases or persons. It's to them that we are thankful for that. That ironed out, not all, but a lot of the misunderstanding that was going on in this key theological, historic debate about the very being of God. So I hope you start digging into some church history. I hope you thank God for the Nicene Creed, and as you do, thank Him also for the Cappadocian Fathers.